Yeah, but Janice might not show up tonight because I went out looking to buy a cow brain.
I called everyone.
Are you serious? You were going to buy cow brain?
Yes.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, because
Look how base that.
most people don't realize how delicate a brain
I said,
really is.
please don't do that, sir.
But when you think about concussions and how many times we get hit in the head and fall down and everything, unless you stop and think about how delicate a brain really is, and the texture, it would be about, I would guess, about halfway between regular Jell-O and finger Jell-O. The finger Jell-O, it's a little bit, you put a little bit more gelatine in to get it a little bit firmer. A brain isn't even that firm. Yeah,
Wow.
and you can take a piece of that and squeeze it and just squish it all over the place.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi,
go
how
ahead.
are you?
Good.
Sorry.
But, when you think of something halfway between finger Jell-O to regular Jell-O, you squeeze that and it becomes mush. But, before we start talking about supercharging a brain, because actually that's the main theme of the supplement world, is to avoid developing problems with the brain. What you want to do is use all these great supplements that will enhance the function of it. And it kind of reminds me of having a moped that you use nitrous oxide in. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to supercharge a small engine or one that isn't firing completely. You take a V8 engine, and if half the cylinders aren't firing, what good does it do to supercharge the other four? So what we're going to talk about tonight is how to get all 8 cylinders firing first before we decide on how we're going to supercharge it, right?
Makes sense.
So that's the reason why I was talking in the beginning about the delicate nature of the brain and how soft it really is, because it's mostly just fat. Fat isn't like muscle tissue. Fat, in fact, if you took a brain and you go like this, you just squish it like oatmeal. Okay?
I had no idea.
Now, I don't know this person that sacrificed their skull so I could show you the inside of a cranium. Okay? But you take a look in there, and it's not soft and smooth. And even the top part, see the little ridge here? Ridge is in the back.
Uh-huh.
Now, it's interesting, but you compare a human being at 80 Gs, that's 80 times gravitational force. When you hit your head at that intensity, you develop a concussion. Well, that's 80 Gs of force. That's like hitting your head into the wall at 20 miles an hour. It'll create a concussion. Okay? You take a woodpecker, and when a woodpecker hits his head against a tree, you'd think there's got to be brain damage there. That's 1,200 Gs that they hit their head at.
Wow.
But the thing is, I don't know how they do it, but they use their tongue, and they wrap their tongue around their jugular veins, and it forces a back pressure of fluid into their cranium so that the fluids are tight around their brain, and then they can hammer without developing brain damage. In fact, the woodpecker-inspired NFL, they're thinking about making helmets that will put pressure on the jugular veins of the football players to cause a back pressure of fluids in the cranium so that they don't develop brain damage. Now, the reason why we can develop concussions so easily is because if you looked at the size of a brain in comparison to the cranium, it doesn't fill the whole cranium. It basically sloshes around in there. And so you slosh a brain against a hard surface, and you knock the person out or create a concussion. Stop and think of another point here while we're talking about the size of the brain. With age, the whole body dehydrates. What do you think happens to the brain as we age? It dehydrates. And so there's more space. And so when we get up in years and we fall down and the brain sloshes and hits the side, you see how easy it is to cause brain damage again and again and again. And two, as we've all realized as we came into adulthood, things don't heal quite as quickly as they did when we were children. And so you fall down as an elderly person, create brain damage, and then the slowness of healing. And if it happens again and again and again, that's a serious problem. Accumulative damage to the brain is a big issue. Now, especially when you stop and think about, besides the hormonal issues and everything else that regulates healing, when you stop and think about the fact that if the body had enough energy, it could heal itself of most anything, but with a dead battery, what in the heck can the body heal? Okay? Now, as you often hear me say, there are no mysteries in the body, none whatsoever. There's a definite reason for everything, and all these problems that we develop are preventable. Now, what are some of the reasons why the brain starts breaking down? Well, let's stop and think for a second. What is it that takes care of the brain? What fuels the brain?
Blood.
The bloodstream. The bloodstream is constantly providing nutrients, oxygen, and everything the brain needs. So basically, if we want to take a look at the quality of the brain, that's easy. We take a look at the blood. Now, of the thousands and thousands of samples of blood that I've seen, I've seen 2 samples in all these years that were clean. Every other sample has scrap metals, chemicals, all kinds of arterial plaque, and of course acid waste and everything else. And the brain is being bathed in this waste material 24 hours a day. Now, of course, there's a very common human term.
Breathing.
When we don't feel real well, oftentimes we hear ourselves say, "Oh man, I feel crappy today," right? We got to keep in mind that with the average adult, the intestinal tract isn't releasing fully. In fact, the average adult is retaining at least 4 to 15 pounds of waste material. Why? Because of the tightness of the lower back, stricturing the colon, and keeping the colon from completely evacuating. So there's a certain volume of that waste material being recycled 24 hours a day. You add to that the metals and chemicals and other waste products that is in that waste material, and as that's recycled, it poisons the brain. Okay? Now, another thing is, because of sedentary lifestyles, when the blood is lacking oxygen, the brain needs more oxygen than probably any part of the body. And if the oxygen is low in the blood, we're starving the brain for oxygen. So now, all of a sudden, the function of the brain is not that distant from the function of the rest of the body. And the cleanliness or toxicity of the brain is equivalent to what's going on in the bloodstream. Now, there's another problem that develops almost with all of us, and that is what I've found to be the one, there's 2 that I've discovered. There's only 2 physical causes for all of our physical problems. There's the magnesium deficiency, and the other is the pivot of the cranium. Okay, now, if I had C1 here, I could show you an alignment of C1 to the cranium, but when you take a look at both together, it's kind of like an aperture in an old-time camera, and when they pivot, it closes down. Okay, now, like with my youngest brother, when he got hit in the boxing ring, it pivoted so far that it closed that opening down solid against the spinal cord, and in 48 hours, it built up so much pressure inside of his cranium that if they didn't drill a hole into his skull immediately and drain those fluids out, he'd have gone ahead and died. There's too much pressure on the brain. He went into convulsions and he passed out and everything, but if they didn't relieve the pressure, he'd have died. With the average adult partially pivoted, can you see how that would restrict the flow of those spinal fluids? When they talk about what is the cause of Alzheimer's, they will never find a single cause for Alzheimer's, because this is one of them. This is also one of the causes for the brain developing tumors. There's two direct and immediate causes for the development of tumors. One is the stagnation of the fluids, because anytime you have stagnation anywhere in the body, you're going to develop a problem. Well, and two, because of the exposure to toxic copper. Copper as a toxic metal activates tumoral growth. Where would it develop that? In a stagnated area. That would be the reason for brain tumors to develop, is when you stagnate copper in the brain along with the other toxic materials, definitely you're going to have problems. Okay? The body always does everything that it can to avoid developing a problem. So if the body develops a problem, you know that there's a serious, serious problem. A lot more serious than we ever give it credit for. But of course, if pain or a problem doesn't knock us down and put us in bed, we think it's not that big of a deal, and we push our way through it. Okay? That's not quite the way the body was designed. The body was designed with all kinds of warning systems to tell us, hey, there's a problem here. Stop and figure out what the problem is and correct it. Otherwise, there's going to be a greater problem later on down the road. Okay? In a nutshell, that's the natural aging process. Us as adult human beings ignoring all the warning signs and waiting till we crash. And crash again and crash again. And we call it the natural aging process? I don't think so. It's simple, human self-destruct. It forces us to keep on going when we should have stopped and checked things out or done things a little bit smarter. Okay, so when you consider the issues associated with all forms of dementia, you're going to find a large amount of aluminum and other toxic metals. Mercury. Mercury has a paralyzing effect on the brain and the nervous system. So mercury is almost always present. Now, we already talked a little bit about copper, but you know, if you took all the symptoms associated with a load of toxic mercury in the body, you'd have a big long laundry list of symptoms. If you had copper present as well, you'd have another list. If you had both, you'd have 3 lists, not just 2. Because the combination of copper and mercury together, they're bad boys. They create another whole list of symptoms and problems. Okay? Now you add aluminum to that, and who isn't overloaded with an excess volume of all these toxic metals? Okay? It's in our food, it's in our water, it's in our air, it's everywhere. And if we don't understand the basics of how to keep this toxic metal out, it isn't because we're exposed that causes the problem. The problem is we hold on to it. If the body could open up and release it, and the best example of what I'm saying here with the toxic metals was discovered when they were observing the effects of radiation one time on a group of sheep under these high-powered power lines. And they found that the radiation didn't affect the sheep at all. And when they figured out the reason why was because the sheep's hooves grounded them out so well where the radiation moved straight through their bodies and didn't accumulate, it didn't cause problems. The reason why the radiation affects us so much is because we wear tennis shoes and we're in insulated homes and buildings all the time, or most of the time. We don't get to ground ourselves out. So we become antenna that isn't grounded, and we accumulate the radiation. Same way with these pathways of elimination, not releasing these toxic metals, we accumulate them, and the chemicals, and all these other things. So what we need to do is, well, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote a script that we'll be sharing with you fairly soon, and it's quite eye-opening. And I present the 7 conveniences that I'm now realizing are responsible for all the degenerative diseases. And when I say conveniences, it's issues that weren't present 150 years ago. 150 years ago and beyond that, the innate wisdom of the body was learning how to heal itself of every type of damage and disease. And it did a great job. The fact that we're all sitting here is proof that the body is a brilliant survival mechanism. But the problem is now, with certain modern day conveniences, it causes problems that if we don't directly address each of those 7 problems, we will develop degenerative disease in time. Because if we don't do anything to reverse the problems caused by those 7 conveniences, the body can't do it. All 7, the body can't do a thing about. And so talking about now getting rid of the excess volumes of chemicals and metals and things like this, we have to come to an understanding of, okay, how do we enhance the body's ability to release these? Because it can't do it on its own. What we've got to do is reverse the effect of the wonderful air conditioning, the way it shuts down the largest organ of elimination in the body, okay? Because we no longer sweat the acids and chemicals out through the skin. With sitting disease, sitting as much as we do, it weakens the lower back to where it congests and tightens up, further reducing the nerve flow to the colon so that the colon can't release completely. And if we don't figure out a way to reverse that, we're going to keep recycling. Then the gallbladder, because of vegetable oils that we've all been exposed to all of our lives. We didn't know that all the commercially prepared foods were being prepared with vegetable oils. Well, because of the inflammatory effect of the vegetable oils on our arteries, that's the reason why by the time we turned 20 years of age, our gallbladders were full of arterial plaque, oxidized arterial plaque, backing the liver up, creating a fatty liver. And from there, kidney problems, lymphatic disorders, and reproductive problems. These aren't just mysterious happenings. The fact that so many women have hysterectomies and are dealing with fibroid cysts and all the problems. It's a natural result of the preparation and development of vegetable oils. Okay? Now keep in mind, that isn't your seed oils, your avocado, and all those others. Those are all good. It's specifically corn oil and soy oils. Most of the vegetable oils that they sell now is soy oil. And soy oil, you can take an extract of soy oil and take 1% in a lake and kill every fish in it. That's how potent that is. And it's accumulative within the human body. So a lot of these problems that we don't know about can be traced back to the simple vegetable oil. When you go into a grocery store and you see the largest containers of the least expensive oils that most people pack out of the grocery store in the gallon jugs and all, that's all vegetable oil. Before vegetable oils, heart disease was practically unheard of. Very, very rare. Now, because the main oil that's being sold is vegetable oil, besides the margarines, which is the same stuff, heart disease is the #1 killer in the country. Is this known? Heck yes, it's known. Why is it the American Heart Association isn't shouting this from the rooftops? Same reason why the pharmaceutical industry doesn't fold a tent and find something decent to do for a living. Did I say that out loud?
Preach it.
Yes.
Preach it.
Where's that big hood? Okay, so there's a lot more to just simple dementia than we ever hear about. What is the composition of the brain? It's mostly water and fat. And we talked a little bit already about the seriousness of being dehydrated. Because if we're dehydrated, poor brain is dehydrated. It's good that we have discovered that we were being lied to nutritionally for the last 100 years, being told that we were glucose burners. Because even though they term the brain a glucose hog, we got to stop and think again. What is the composition of the brain? It's mostly fat. And so it makes sense that between the two fuels, fats and carbohydrates, the brain, if it got a vote in all of this, it would vote for the fats as a fuel. Make sense? And what is the very favorite fat of brains?
Fish oil.
Fish oil. Fish oil. Now, they are, for people who feel like, I am not going to eat an animal. I will figure it out another way. Before you couldn't get a good algae, I thought about this a couple of years ago. I was thinking, well, let's eat fish food instead of the fish. And we can get the oils from that. Well, at that time, the main algae they were working with only had the DHA. It didn't have the EPA, and we needed a balance of the two. Now they found the microalgae that are high in the EPA, and so they get it from two different sources, put it together, and you can get a good balance of both DHA and EPA, just as though it's fish oil, but it's from plant source. Okay? So now you can feed your brain what it really needs. Lecithin is another good thing that brains need. In fact, one of the main sources of lecithin from the past was eating animal brains. I can remember one time my father prepared that for me, and I never did get used to it. After that one time, I decided, okay, we won't do that again. But I can imagine that if you start out eating something like that when you're younger and you get used to it, that'd be a great source of natural lecithin. But seeds and grains, especially sprouted, will provide a good source of lecithin. But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there's only two physical causes for all of our physical problems: a magnesium deficiency and the pivot of the cranium. Both of those horribly affect the brain. For the reasons that we have already talked about of stagnating the fluids in the cranium, a pivoted cranium is very hard on the brain. But again, the moisture content of the brain is essential, brain and the nervous system. And that's the reason why magnesium is so important to the brain and the nervous system. Because if you take the ideal magnesium, if you take the ideal form of magnesium that the body and the brain needs, it's magnesium chloride. And if you take a pinch of magnesium chloride and put it here on the desk and come back 10 minutes later, there will be a puddle of water there. You won't see the magnesium, it'll just be a puddle of water. Magnesium chloride has such an affinity for moisture it will carry the moisture into the nervous system and the brain and keep it hydrated. Very important. In fact, there's two essential nutrients for the brain and nervous system. That is B6 and magnesium. And unfortunately, most adults are deficient in magnesium and B6. Okay? Very important clue. And two, the pancreas happens to need the same too. You'll find that B6 is probably the nutrient of greatest demand for most chemistry functions in the body. And most adults are quite deficient of B6. Got to keep that in mind. So when we look at the entire health of the body, the brain is always demanding the cleanest blood possible. And this is one reason why, if the brain sees that the liver can't keep up on the workload of cleaning the blood and keeping the pH of the blood at proper pH, the brain will do whatever it needs to keep that blood clean. And what it usually does is tighten the muscles under the clavicles here to stagnate the lymph in the body. Because when you stop and think about what lymph is, it's a fluid that washes the acid waste away from every cell in the body. And it brings it up through the entire body, right here under the clavicles, and dumps it into the bloodstream. But if we don't have enough alkaline buffers in the blood to keep the pH of the blood protected, or if the liver isn't able to keep the blood clean enough, the brain's observing all this because it's looking at the blood that's coming into there. And if the quality isn't up to par, it'll tighten the muscles right here and stagnate that lymph. That's the reason why we need to come to a deeper understanding rather than thinking, oh my gosh, my lymph is stagnated. I need lymphatic massages and I need lymphatic drainage. No. I need to get that filter system working better. And don't fight the brain, because if we try and force the lymph, we're only fighting our own brain. And the brain it's actually the innate wisdom of the body, and that is a whole library of information that has evolved over thousands of years, and it knows exactly what's going on. And here we are consciously, dumb as a stump, coming along, fighting against that brilliance to normalize the condition. What we really need to do is go into a deeper understanding of, okay, why did the brain do this? Why did the brain stagnate the lymph? Okay, because there was nowhere for that lymph to go, or the pH was off. So what do? We start alkalizing better. The best way to alkalize is to dump the acids out of the body. You know, alkalizing the body has become extremely popular, but it's kind of like putting the horse behind the cart. What we've got to do is look at, okay, why is the body so acidic? It's because the pathways of elimination that are supposed to be dumping those acids, they're all clogged up and stopped up. And you can't alkalize that much battery acid that we accumulate. We've got to reopen those pathways and dump the acids. We've got to get the gallbladder cleared out, get the liver functioning so we'll take the burden off from the kidneys. Kidneys are being referred to as organs of elimination. I think that that's a horrible insult to the kidneys. The kidneys are actually chemistry regulators. They're brilliant pH balancers. But if they're overwhelmed, being forced to pretend to be livers because the liver can't do its job, then we lose our ability to maintain the proper pH. So we've got to come all the way back and realize, okay, the problem starts with the trash can of the liver, the gallbladder getting clogged up and backing the liver up. The liver throwing the burden onto the kidneys, then throwing it into women's periods to desperately clean the bloodstream when the liver can't do it. That's the real story behind fibroid cysts and all female reproductive problems. It's that cascading effect of the gallbladder getting overloaded first, backing the liver up, the liver not being able to do its job, so the wisdom of the body throwing that onto the kidneys. Kidneys can't help it, so every month during a woman's period, out of desperation, the body is using the periods to try and clean the bloodstream. When it can't eliminate, and especially in the presence of a tampon instead of a sanitary napkin, which is like a cork, then the body brilliantly develops little trash cans to store the waste material that it can't release. Those are called fibroids, cysts, and all these female reproductive problems that cause doctors to think that you need a hysterectomy.
So if women didn't use tampons and use napkins instead of that, but
It will allow more
eliminate,
of a
it would be
release.
less backup, less
Less back pressure. Yes.
back pressure, less cysts. Got it.
But we got to go back even farther, start with the gallbladder.
Yeah, I
first.
gotcha.
But for safety, any of your daughters, tell them, do it wiser, don't use the tampons. They're more convenient, yes, there are a lot of positives, but the end result is not good. Okay? And all that, of course, affects the brain too. If you can't get, if all the doors leading out of the body are all closed and plugged up, of course, the brain has to suffer the consequences. Okay, so if we do everything that we normally talk about through body chemistry support to support the innate wisdom of the body, to clear all these pathways, normalize the chemistry, and get everything functioning properly, all 8 cylinders firing, by discontinuing the poisoning and the destruction of the body. That's the real starting point. Not to try and supercharge a brain that is only half working because it's being actively destroyed by our lifestyle habits. So if we stop destroying
Environment.
through the internal environment that we've created, now at this point, if we've cleared that all up, and it's the same work that I always talk about of how to support the body and normalizing the chemistry functions and everything. Now we're back to the point of, okay, well, what can we do then to enhance the function of the brain? Maybe to reverse some of the damage that we've already created. Okay, there are many fantastic tools in the nutritional world that will enhance the function of the brain. As we've talked about already, we've got to make sure that it's hydrated, make sure that we got the magnesium there, the fish oils or the algae oils, and the other fats and oils, the good healthy fats and oils, like avocado and things like this, that are so good for the brain. And then there are actual foods that are very good for the brain. It's interesting how much a walnut looks like the brain. They are very good for the brain. We've heard all of our lives that eggs are brain food. Eggs have a great lecithin in them, besides great proteins. And so, yes, eggs are very good for the brain. I know, just like with butter, eggs have been demonized, well, just like coconut oil and a lot of other great foods have been demonized by industry that felt too much competition. It's not that they were bad, it was just that they were too competitive with garbage that they wanted to sell. Okay, but those are all 3 good foods, so we got to be aware of what the truth is and take care of ourselves by self-education. Okay. I put together a formula about, shoot, the way time flies now, it's probably about a year, 8 months ago or so, brain formula. Anyway, the first ingredient is MSM, and you think, well, wait a second, that's for joints. But when you think about the plasticity of the brain, what is more important, what cell in the body is more important than the brain to make more flexible? That's what MSM is really good for, that's why it's so good for the joints, is because it makes the cells more permeable to where they can release toxic waste and they can draw nutrients in. where do we need that function more than in the brain? That's the reason why every portion of the brain formula provides 1,200 milligrams of MSM, because we want a very flexible brain. Okay? Improving the ability of the brain cells to release toxic waste and bring in nutrient and oxygen. There's a lot of, each of the other ingredients, we've got 10 ingredients in there. You hardly see more than 2 or 3 of these together in any formula. The reason why I put all of these together in here is because they were not only synergistic with one another, but they all enhanced circulation improvement, oxygen delivery, dilating capillaries, and then of course the flexibility of the brain. They all target accomplishing what the brain needs most. We have tyrosine, which of course the main use for tyrosine is generally for pigmentation of the skin, but it's absolutely vital for functions in the brain. In fact, several of these ingredients enhance the production of serotonin and protect the destruction of dopamine, as well as enhancing the production of dopamine. So the result of it is also going to be a mood elevator and help us to relax, because the main tool that we as adult humans use to destroy ourselves with is stress. And if, because of certain deficiencies within the brain, it increases the stress levels, it's even more destructive to the brain. There's phosphatidylserine is probably one of the most popular supplements for the brain. I think that it's absolutely essential, so that's another ingredient here. With most of these, you know, it's funny. I've been before I put this formula together, I spent a couple of years studying different formulas, and it's interesting how many companies will take key ingredients that are made popular and take the studies done about what each of those accomplishes, claim that their product will do that, but only have a dusting of that product, that ingredient in the product. As you'll notice, there is full potencies. Any research project that you study where they talk about using one of these ingredients in the study, this will usually, the amounts that I have here of every one of them is usually the amount that is used. Now, because of using all of these in a synergistic form, you really don't need that quantity. So this is a therapeutic amount when you think about the effect of each one enhancing the others. Because in a few cases here, there is up to like 3 forms of antioxidants or memory enhancers and all of these. And so, but each one has specific characteristics too that adds just a little bit more. They may overlap a little bit as far as antioxidants and protection and everything else, but each one has its own specific qualities of enhancement as well. And so anyway, like I say, there's 10 ingredients here. If you were to go out and get all 10 products, which usually they're separate products, even if you could find them for like $10 a piece, you'd have $100 right there for a month's supply. I think, what do we sell for, 48 or something like that? $49.95. That's what we try and do with each of the formulas, is provide a way to where you can get the most groceries. That's why it's in a powdered form instead of capsules, so you can get all the potencies that we can get into there for for the least amount that we can provide it for you for. There's another one that you might be interested in too that we call it stress reduction. And it only has 3 ingredients in that. It's valerian root, and then not only the tryptophan that will help, it's the building material for serotonin, but also the 5-HTP, which is a precursor for the creation of serotonin. And so like if anxiety and excess stress is a problem, what we found works real well is instead of taking it as a sleep aid in the evening, which it would work for that as well, taking 6 of them in the evening to knock yourself out, kind of. Instead of that, you take 2 of them 3 times a day, and you keep from building stress through the day, so that you're just naturally more relaxed at the end of the day. But that would work hand in hand with the brain formula to increase serotonin and dopamine and to give a calming effect to the brain and the whole nervous system. Okay? And keep in mind, since we are the sole authors of our entire lives, and since we are the authors of all of our stressors in life, we have complete control on that. You know, it's like, why keep throwing sand in the bearings if we don't have to? So if we slow down on the amount of stress that we author in our lives, obviously there's going to be less destruction, there's going to be less irritation, because it doesn't matter what problem you bring up, stress is going to be the entire foundation of it anyhow. And so when you're talking about the brain and the nervous system, you know, you think about a person with Parkinson's, you know, shaking all over the place. It was interesting, I think Adele Davis back in the early 60s nailed it the best. When you stop and think about, well, what does that look like? Well, it looks like somebody's scared. But maybe they suppressed that fear for a lifetime. And she found a gentleman that she worked with that had real bad Parkinson's. And of course, yes, we can go back and we can identify the nutritional deficiencies that support the breakdown of the nervous system. But keep in mind that we're busy authoring by the way we feel, because the body is the crystallized form of our emotions. And so you take the crystallized form of the emotion that would manifest in this way. And what she found was this gentleman, she understood enough to realize it's kind of like this medical doctor back in New York. When a person comes in with back pain, he'll never send them to a physical therapist. He'll say, have a seat. And he'll sit down with him and say, what's bugging you? What's your problem? And every time, by the time they get to the bottom of the major emotional issue in that person's life, within a week or 2, the back pain is gone. But he says that I've done this with every single person that's ever come to me with back problems, and I help them to discover what they're suppressing or what they're ignoring or what they're muscling their way through. And when we figure it out and I get them to come up with a solution of how they can get rid of that issue, he says the back pain goes away. Well, that's the same insight that Adele Davis had back in the early 60s when she sat down with this gentleman that had Parkinson's, and she says, what is it that generated this tremendous fear? And they talked for long enough to where the guy remembered a situation when he was 8 years old. He was out in the field with his mom, and they were burning the grass in the field. And the wind came up and whipped the fire in a circle around them, and he was so short he couldn't see over the flames, and he just knew for sure that they were going to be burned to death. Of course, the mother looked all directions. She was busy trying to look for a way out, so she wasn't attending to him right away. And then she grabbed him and took him like a football through the best path and got him out of there. But just that short period of time of fear of, I'm going to be burned to death, and probably already did the touch the stove, find out it burns type thing, and realize that fire is going to hurt, and especially if it burns me to a crisp. But that fear being suppressed over a lifetime destroyed, again, it's a type of stress, destroyed the nutrients that support a strong nervous system, and eventually manifested as fear, expressed. If you keep that one thought in mind, that the body is literally the crystallized form of our emotions, it simplifies everything. Okay. What is stress anyway? Stress is our resistance to acknowledging and releasing our fears. It's sociably acceptable to stress out all the time. Everybody does it. But is it sociably acceptable to sit around and talk about our fears? We even suppress the terminologies of what we're ignoring or suppressing. But that's what life is really all about, is mastering these fears that we call stress. And when you stop and make a list of all the stressors in your life, you realize that 80% of them are insignificant little issues that could actually be removed quite easily and quite quickly. And the major ones that appear to be permanent, the reason why they're stressors is because of our perception about them. Our negative perceptions about these issues are the destructive force against us. We got to remember that every one of those issues has two sides, a positive and a negative. And when we first invited it into our lives, we saw only the positive. The longer it was present and the longer we looked at it, we started seeing another side. And the more the brain is worked in this way, when it starts seeing a negative, it starts focusing more on it because the brain thinks that it was designed to fix everything. And so it's got to look at what's wrong and identify it, and make it wrong, and try and fix it. And so it's totally focused on the negative until all that exists is the negative, and that's very stressful if it's a permanent part of our lives. And so really all we need to do is, after we clear the insignificant stressors out of our lives, re-perceive the other side, the positive side of that issue in our lives. Why it's an enhancement in our lives instead of a burden. Because it's both. But since the most powerful principle in our daily lives is the principle of focused attention, I think it's in our own best interest to focus on the positive side rather than the negative. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Anybody have any questions, or is there any issues that I brought up about brain health that we need to discuss a little bit more?
How do you know if your magnesium is low? Like having function?
If you have 2 hands and 2 feet and you live in California, your magnesium is horribly low.
Or if you're human.
Or if you're human. There's no magnesium in the water down here, and there's practically no magnesium in the food because it's not in the soil. I don't know why that is, because it's so easy to throw a bag of Epsom salt onto the farming soil, but they don't do it for some reason, I don't know. They could replace the magnesium so easily. Well, the real problem is in farming nowadays, they put a combination, different combinations of potassium, potash, and nitrogen. No trace minerals, or very few trace minerals, but it's mostly those 3 because that causes the plants to grow beautifully and green and produce great looking vegetables. But if you evaluate the mineral content, there's practically no trace minerals, and depending on the deficiency of the major minerals from the soil, they're going to be missing in the vegetables.
So do we get enough magnesium when we take the ozonated mag with our Valtone? Are we
No.
getting- No. So
Well,
what
that-
would you recommend?
What used to be the
You
buffer,
want the chloride?
magnesium
Yeah.
chloride is
Chloride,
bulk
no,
of minerals,
okay.
yeah.
So we'll include that then Okay.
If you make 2 quarts a day with 1 capful of that, you're covered.
Yes, okay,
Right,
right.
is that liquid?
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yes, I know what you're talking about, yeah.
And the neat thing is, the whole quart is fulvic minerals, so there's all your
Oh,
trace
okay.
minerals.
Okay,
And then we just added enough of the magnesium chloride, because I've tried a dozen different ways of trying to contain that stuff into capsules and powders and everything else. It's like trying to hold water.
okay,
That's okay for the bugs, but we can't do it.
okay.
The magnesium, because its affinity for moisture,
Mhm.
makes it impossible to encapsulate or put it with other things. It's just
Okay.
not user friendly, but it works well in the
Okay,
liquid.
so just buy those minerals, okay, okay, good.
Mick,
You know,
Yes. What's it?
did you say 2 capsules or 1 capful of the magnesium chloride?
1 cap that's 1 ounce.
2 quarts of water.
That's 2
Okay.
2 tablespoons.
Okay.
Yes.
you know, I go to a traditional Chinese doctor.
I can't
He
hear
said-
you.
I go to a traditional Chinese doctor,
Uh-huh,
and he says at least 2 tablespoons of fat a day.
uh-huh.
So I get organic pastures raw butter, and I blend it with flax oil and coconut oil, and make a big tub of butter. Now, is that good?
Sounds great.
Because raw butter is good for us too.
Yep.
And, okay. Like if you're taking the stress relief pills, is there a time that is okay to take them and then it's not good anymore? Good forever, or should you take them off and on, or what?
Well, the
is-
fact that, like the valerian root, that's an herb, and herbs you'd normally want to use as a treatment. So I would say that you could consider that a treatment. Now, why would you need a treatment for the rest of your life? That's saying that we're going to keep smashing our thumb every single day and then bandaging it up. Well, let's stop smashing it so that the treatment can bring us the solution. Now, we're brainwashed to believe that we always have to keep fixing ourselves. Well, here's a clue. There's only one cause for all of our problems. Just one. Human self-destruct. We keep smashing the thumb, and we can stop whenever we're satisfied that we've endured enough pain. Right? We're doing it to ourselves. It's our lifestyle habits. And the key word here is habits. What we do every single day equals what the body function is. Okay? If we keep doing self-destructive things, then yes, we have to keep fixing every single day. If you can't sleep at night, there's a reason. What is the main reason why people can't sleep at night? They have a dead battery. In other words, they exchange their life force for accomplishment, and there isn't enough energy to help the body relax and sleep. The nervous system is wired and keeps you awake. Now, some people discovered, if I stay up and I read a book or watch television until 1 o'clock in the morning, I can go to sleep. Yeah, well, that's good for 2 hours because you didn't go to sleep, you passed out. And then your nervous system woke you up again. That's not the way to do it, to exhaust yourself more. You've got to consider that the battery's dead, and you've got to pamper the body and start a savings account of energy. Stop wasting it and start creating more energy. What is the greatest destroyer of human energy besides us exchanging it for accomplishments? It's a toxic body. The poisons that we carry, the chemicals, the metals, the acid waste, all destroy our energy. If we get rid of all that stuff, the body has more energy. Food is not the answer. Okay, we need to reduce the quantities of food because that robs our body of energy to break it down, process it, and then get rid of it again because it was in excess of what we really needed. You do a 24-hour water fast once a week, that'd be great. The body would celebrate. Yahoo! Eat about 5 small, very nutritious meals a day and keep the metabolism speeded up. keep everything functioning better. That will add to the energy. Get rid of our stressors in life. Remember that a synonym for energy in the body, and this is for the brain and every part of the body, a synergy for energy is joy. Figure out how to give joy permission to express itself through the body again, and it will happily start expressing again, and the battery will get a charge. Okay? Everything is energy. The secret to life is the essence of life. And the more of it we can accumulate in the body, the happier we are and the better life is to us.
When you were talking that analogy about the sheep under the power lines and getting bombarded with the radiation and it not bothering them because it just kind of went right through them into the earth, and we stopped that because of our shoes and whatnot. So like grounding and going to the ocean and walking in the water and
Greatest
connecting
thing you
with
can
the
do
earth.
is walk on the wet sand.
Because we're always getting bombarded with our phones and just Wi-Fi and all kinds of weird stuff
Oh,
happening
yeah.
everywhere. To do that is just a great way to
Yes.
rebalance.
Yes.
How about the cell phone tower emission? How do we get rid of that? Can we?
The best way is walking on wet sand, or ground yourself out every way that you can. Doing your detox baths twice a week, that grounds you out. You have all that salt and soda in there, that sucks the radiation right out and puts it in the plumbing. There's certain steps that we need to do consistently to reverse the ill effects of these problems. Enhancing digestion with plant enzymes. That's the body's number one desire for us. What do you think that'll do for the brain? If you digest your food better and deliver the nutrients into the blood so that the brain can enjoy that. Then clearing the intestinal tract so that you're not recycling that waste material into the brain again. Rebalancing the intestinal flora. That is the body's natural neutralizer of the intestinal poisons. Okay? Then doing the 2 detox baths a week, cleaning the blood and the lymph of toxic metals, chemicals, and acid waste. Then doing the gallbladder flushes again and again and again so that the liver can function again as it was designed as a blood filter. These are basic 101 steps that everybody should be doing consistently. Then you move to the next step of enhancing brain function, hormone function, and the rest. The reason why I've been taking my time about developing more of these enhancers is because I'm trying to get everybody to realize that, hey, if you don't take out the garbage, what good does it do to, it's kind of like going in and remodeling a home, and you don't take out the old wallpaper, you just slap more on top of it, even though it's all torn and coming down. That's not the way we do things. You got to take out get the old garbage out, and then bring in the new materials to rebuild.
Gallbladder flushes
Yes.
once a month?
It depends on what's going on with your gallbladder and the liver. Now, with a lot of people that I've been screening lately, it's like every single week. Okay, now, the rule of thumb, which I used to think was extreme before, and now I realize that it's basically right spot on, and that is to reverse a lifetime accumulation of the garbage and a lifetime accumulation of damage. We need to do a gallbladder flush for every year of our lives, just to get caught up. Then, once a month would be fine. But in the beginning, depending on a lot of the symptoms and what's going on in the liver and gallbladder, most people really do need to do a gallbladder flush most weeks until they get that flow going and get the excess cleaned up. Yes, ma'am.
About gallbladder flush. So for whatever reason, could you tell me what kind of mistakes the one can do? Because last 2 times I put an effort, in doing it, and my body just hated it.
Well, everybody's body hates them.
No, not hated, ate it.
Well,
Like,
they do it?
yeah, I didn't get the results, like, it went like a food, you know?
Okay,
So,
there's three
I don't know
reasons.
what's the problem.
Okay, how much magnesium did you take?
Some.
Okay, you want to follow the directions completely, and then keep in mind, the importance of opening up the nerve flow from the upper back with the foam roller.
Mhm.
There's only 3 reasons why in the beginning a gallbladder flush might not work.
But
One-
2 previous times it worked, and then last 2 times something is not working, and so I was curious, what could I possibly do more?
It could be chaff, not showing up, getting caught up in the fecal matter, but every one of them you should see results every time.
Mm-mm.
Okay, make sure your back is opened up with the roller. Make sure you take enough magnesium. And since you've already seen success, there's no reason why, if you keep your back opened up well enough and just follow the directions, it'll work.
That's why I got confused, because I'm like, I don't
You
know,
should
I
have
took
called.
the salt. What's
You
that?
should have called.
I'm kidding.
Okay.
So anyway.
But what we've been doing is gallbladder flushes, and the instructions that you have is what you should be doing. But when you feel you want to go to the next level, you can talk to Janice and she'll coach you on how to do what we're calling the turbo gallbladder flush, which isn't a gallbladder flush, it's actually a liver flush. And contemplating on that, I think we've stumbled onto a way of actually reversing a fatty liver. I thought before, by clearing the gallbladder completely, that the liver will naturally release its contents. But as I saw the results of this additional gallbladder flush, which before we did that, the last dozen gallbladder flushes that we did, it was just little bits of chaff. It was like not really worth doing them. And then we did this new gallbladder flush, which had a huge volume of magnesium hydroxide, and it contracted the liver and passed large marble-sized cholesterol balls again, things that I hadn't seen before. Rob, Flower, all of us that have done this got the same surprising results of large cholesterol balls again, which we haven't seen for a long time since the gallbladder was cleaned out. And so I realized that all that was being released from the liver all that time was just chaff, all current stuff. But the developments within the liver of the arterial balls, the arterial plaque balls, they were still stuck up there until we provided enough of the magnesium hydroxide to actually squeeze them out of the liver. And then it was like the biggest gallbladder flushes ever. I know that my gallbladder has been clean for at least a couple of years. And that every time that I did a gallbladder flush, it was just that chaff that moved through the liver. But when we did this intensified one, I got a whole cup full of the same straight cholesterol balls.
And that's from the liver.
That was from the liver. And so now I know that we've figured out how to reverse a fatty liver.
Does it spasm? Does the magnesium hydroxide, the extra, make the liver kind of
I don't think
contract?
it's spasm because magnesium relaxes. I think it just relaxed the liver so
Just
much.
like,
It just dumped it.
okay.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Every time that we promote diarrhea, is that safe to say that we are detoxifying the body?
Well, we're clearing the intestinal tract. And when we induce diarrhea, when we're doing the gallbladder flush, it's not only clearing the intestinal tract, but it's relaxing the gallbladder and the liver to dump their contents as well. That's the benefit of magnesium, is it's relaxing. And that's the reason why I'm encouraging everybody to use the ozonated magnesium instead of the fiber regulators, because herbal laxatives irritate the intestinal tract to cause it to backflush, and that's how they work. But magnesium relaxes, so it's a more gentle way of clearing everything.
Well, does your gallbladder flush include this magnesium hydroxide?
Yes, well, the turbo does. Actually, you can do either one now, magnesium citrate or hydroxide, whichever one you want. But what we did when we intensified it was the magnesium hydroxide. But I think 2.5 tablespoons or what is it, 3 tablespoons? 3 tablespoons of either one ought to relax your liver.
I kind of had the same situation as the lady here, where I actually did the magnesium hydroxide, and the first time I did it, I didn't see anything, and then the second time I did it, I did. This last week I did it, and nothing again. And so, like, is it just a matter of, I mean, what, is there a factor that I'm not aware of that I?
No, it's in the beginning, the first dozen or so, it's kind of like a roller coaster ride, because in the beginning, you got to know that your gallbladder was stretched out of shape, and so it's going to, sometimes you'll get nothing because it's still shrinking up again because of the contents being dumped. And so it's got a lot of shrinkage that it's got to go through. So you just keep doing it, maybe space an extra week or so, and just be patient with it, and then it'll start dumping again.
Oh, you mean go every other week?
If you're not getting anything, skip a week and give it time to shrink up and to open up the nerve flow from the back, and then try it again. How much magnesium did you take this last time?
3+.
Okay, then give it time, then skip a week. Yeah.
So it shrinks then, and so it was big, so nothing's coming out, is that what you're saying?
It was a stretched out muscular bag,
Okay,
and so you dumped it, and so now it's a
that makes sense.
flappy bag.
Okay,
And so it takes time to shrink up now.
got it.
That only happens during the first 6 months of doing gallbladder flushes, and then once it's back to a reasonable size, now it's a muscular bag again, and it can contract.
Because I have folks that aren't having results every once in a while, and
Yeah.
now I can explain that to them.
Okay.
Okay.
So if I understand, so then the liver, when we're doing the gallbladder flushes, it's flushing some stuff out, not necessarily the cholesterol balls, but some things, and that's what is causing it to decrease in size?
No, see, the arterial plaque, the cholesterol balls, stretch the gallbladder way out of shape.
Oh.
And when you dumped it the first couple times, now it's just an empty bag. So it's got to shrink up again.
But physically go back.
Because it should only be about this big, about the size of your thumb or a little bit bigger. But the average person's gallbladder, when they're about 20 years of age, is more like the size of a fist, as shown by what we've seen dump out at times from the gallbladder.
And just to make sure that I understood what you said about opening this place, so you just kind of open it, right?
You lie that on the floor like this, from the left to right, turn around, lay back against it, lace your fingers and put them behind your head, raise your bottom up so that your back is on the roller and your feet like this. You just roll back and forth, and it'll decongest the muscles and open up the nerve flow to the gallbladder and liver.
Okay, the whole spine.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay? All right, any other questions?
I have a silly one.
Talk about the hormone rescue.
Okay. What's your question?
Well, I always use organic fresh lemon when I make my lemonade and stuff like that. And they're so hard to find these days, and plus when you do find them, they want a mint for them. So, I mean, I finally, I found